Good afternoon, President Bass and members of the City Council. Thanks for having me this afternoon. We'll go to the next slide. Just by way of introduction, name is Ian Appleyard. I have been the Human Resources Director for the City of Oakland for 6.5 years now. I started my career in public sector probably 30 years ago, and most of that time in human resources. Started with Oakland in June of 2000 as an HR analyst doing recruitment and have just progressed up through the organization. And so I'm very familiar with how the Human Resources Department works. And, I wanted to just emphasize on the top here that HR has changed in so many significant ways, especially in the last 3 years. Traditionally, this is a very internally focused department, very much concerned about compliance with regulations and labor agreements. But it has really evolved lately, and we're far more equity driven, far more data driven. There's a lot of emphasis on retention, really trying to grow our citywide training and focus on organizational health as it gets more and more challenging to fill job positions. In the city of Oakland, we really have had a focus on retention, and because the best way to prevent a vacancy or to fill a vacancy is to prevent a vacancy. So I'll take the next slide. And with that, we also have worked on a more robust employee appreciation program. In the last, I'd say 5 years, we have an Oakland Rocks employee committee that's made up of members from different departments, and they put on appreciation events for city employees, and we look forward to continuing to grow those efforts. So what's happening with human resources? We have 58 budgeted positions, and those the additional 8 FTEs came online in January 2023, so recently. And that number of 15 vacancies has actually been reduced down to 13 vacancies. 10 of those are in recruitment, but there's been a lot of exciting momentum building in recruitment staffing and class and compensation staffing. We have, where we've traditionally had, during my entire tenure with Oakland, one manager, human resources manager, over our recruitment activities, we now have 2 managers over recruitment activities. It's kind of resources that I've dreamed of. So it's really important that we have that in place. We've also recently filled 2 supervisory positions. We have 3 total, so that's significant. And we've done a number of internal promotions. So there's a lot of momentum filling our analyst level positions, supervisor and manager positions. Our vacancies are mainly around the technician and clerk positions, and we are in the process of filling those jobs right now. So a lot of great progress happening on the recruitment front, and you'll see as one of our main strategies for filling vacancies is more robust staffing for human resources. So a number of core functions out of human resources. Clearly, recruitment, classification, compensation is our main thrust. That's where about I'd say 65-70% of our positions are around recruitment, classification, compensation. Labor and employer relations is high profile and very critical element of human resources. So that is working with our 7 different labor unions on matters that fall into the realm of negotiations. Risk management, also critical, especially around the last 3 years with the pandemic. Risk management has really been thrust into the spotlight with regulations around COVID leave and COVID safety. So they are fully staffed at this point. Benefits administration, this is an area that is kind of a quiet hero of human resources, but this unit provides medical, dental, vision, and other life insurance benefits to city employees. Often this is called the total rewards area, but we call it benefits administration, and this is a very strong unit. Also well staffed at this time. Training and organizational development, like I said, this is a big focus. We've elevated the classifications and staff training and organizational development. We're adding a senior analyst position, which will increase the unit 33%. There will be 3 individuals over this area, and it certainly could use more because there's no limit really on how much training and organizational development a healthy organization can do. And like I said, that's got to be an important focus at a time when we're really struggling to fill vacancies because of the market challenges. Equal access is a very important program. It ensures language access for the community to city services. We will provide you an annual report to show you the level of access we are providing. They also administer a bilingual pay program and translation services for city council meetings and other department functions. Civil Service Board, the personnel director, which is my role, as the secretary to the Civil Service Board. They're a policy and sort of appeal body. They meet once a month, and they approve job specifications, leave of absence, provisional appointments. So real compliance with the Civil Service Board. And layoff management, just for context, when I started in Oakland in 2000, layoffs were an annual event. The budget was always kind of up and down, and really for the first 12 years of my time here, layoffs happened sometimes more frequently than annually. Since 2012, this organization has not laid off on a broad scale employees. So we've been in good times, but this is a function that I am familiar with, the staff is familiar with, and it's one of those things that is terribly unfortunate when it comes up, but it does become a priority pretty quickly depending on the budget. I'll take the next slide, please. So our governance structure comes from Charter Section 9, the personnel policy, and that lays out the Civil Service Board, what positions are exempt from the civil service, what positions are covered by the civil service, and what is the process for exempting positions. So you'll hear positions described as covered by the civil service or exempt from civil service, and that is the personnel policy and charter sections where that is derived from. The Civil Service Board has a personnel manual. You also hear those referred to as the Civil Service Rules. That ensures a merit-based competitive system of employment for those positions that are covered in the civil service. Approximately, I'd say 80% of our positions are covered by the civil service, therefore requiring a competitive process and establishment of an eligible list. And this system has been in place with Oakland for nearly a decade. It has gone through a couple of rewrites and revisions, but largely it's the core functions of a competitive process are still there. Labor agreements are an important part of how human resources does its work. Really, the civil service rules are kind of the foundation, but labor agreements are the most important part of what we have to comply with. And those agreements are, again, there are 7 labor unions, and there are various different kinds of agreements that impact recruitment, classification, and many other terms and conditions of employment. I'll get into that in a little bit. Administrative instructions, those are administrative policies, citywide policies. I'll highlight those on the next slide. So some of these are just a sample of important workplace policies. Administrative Instruction 71 is our anti-discrimination policy, and that is administered and run by the Employment Investigations and Civil Rights Compliance Unit. And this is a policy every city employee must be familiar with. It's required to be familiar with. You and your role as city council members need to read this policy. It's very important. It's very core to how we conduct business in the city of Oakland. Administrative Instruction 596, Code of Conduct. This policy came up through negotiations with labor unions who felt like there need to be a code of conduct throughout the city. So that is something you should also be familiar with. It does address City Charter Section 218, which is a non-interference clause with administrative affairs. That's where it would be important for city council members to be familiar with. AI 544 is violence in the workplace. This is the city's zero tolerance policy for not just acts of violence in the workplace, but threats of violence in the workplace. Research has shown that when there are threats, that often can predict an act of violence. So we take those very seriously. We investigate them right away. We have a team that will work to determine the level of the threat and effective and appropriate corrective action. AI 577 is a drug-free workplace policy that is currently being revised. Mainly has to do with sort of the federal regulations around a drug-free workplace. A new policy that we have developed just in the last year, and we're training all city employees on right now. It's getting a lot of very positive feedback. Is the AI 73 gender inclusion policy, and that is, like I said, getting a lot of distribution right now. There's also Civil Service Rule 12 that is part of the Civil Service Rules, and that's conflict of interest. We are developing an employment AI as well. So this is where city employees do need to disclose their conflict of interest. So I'll take the next slide. Talk a little bit about the city council and committee reports that Human Resources will come to you on a regular basis. First of all is the semi-annual staffing report, and that is June and December. So this report previously was called the vacancy report, and it was issued twice a year to give the Finance and Management Committee and the City Council an understanding of how many positions are vacant. And the perception of this report was how vacancies can be used to save money and close budget gaps. But in the last, I'd say 5 years, we've retitled it a staffing report. It could be a workforce report, but basically to give a broader understanding of the City of Oakland employees and the workforce. So we do still look at vacancies and the different aspects of the vacancy rate, which include whether positions are frozen or not, or whether they're encumbered with temporary employees. We also look at sort of staffing data so we can understand trends and how Oakland compares to other jurisdictions. And actually using other jurisdictions' vacancy rates now. They didn't used to have a vacancy rate. Now other jurisdictions have it. So now we can compare across our region, how Oakland is doing in comparison to other regional jurisdictions, and I'm getting more data around the statewide and national jurisdictions. So we can see if we're an outlier, if we are trending in similar situations, having similar struggles to other jurisdictions. I'd say for the most part, we are very similar to other places, but we also like to look at staffing tenure, turnover rates. Sometimes we look at age and demographics so we can get an understanding of succession planning as well. We'll bring in workers' compensation annual report that's due in March. That will be coming. Just the utilization of workers' comp. This is a very expensive program that we have. We have a lot of employees that have had injuries over time, and it's important for council to know the expense of this function. And then the Equal Access Annual Report comes in September, where it will be presented the utilization of city services for equal access and getting and eliminating barriers and increasing access of residents to city services. I'll take the next slide, please. There are other items that we'll be bringing in front of council, or HR will be bringing in front of council. That includes changes to compensation or titles that require city council approval. This is called the salary ordinance. So every classification has a pay affiliated with it. That pay and that title can only be changed by city council. So you will see this routinely brought to city council probably, I want to say 4 to 6 times a year, maybe even more. And this occurs after we've had a discussion with the departments and the unions to maybe establish a new job classification or increase the pay of a job classification. So once it gets to city council, it has been vetted from the departments and from the union. And it's a pretty routine process. And it is the update of the organizational chart, which is what we also call the classification plan. Other things HR will bring are civil service exemptions. So, as I mentioned, the charter details what positions are exempt from civil service, but there's a process in there as well to exempt additional positions from the civil service. And that process is to bring the job classification title to the city council, and then the city council makes a formal recommendation to the civil service board, and the civil service board will exempt new classifications through that process. And I'll take the next slide, please. So what's on a lot of people's mind these days is the state of hiring and vacancies. In October, in the fall, our vacancy rate hit 19%. It is pretty high. You can see 16% in 2018. So there has been an increase. It's fluctuated over that time. As I mentioned when I gave the staffing report earlier this year or late last year, that vacancy rate of 19% is actually lessened because about 2 to 3% of those positions are frozen and unable to be filled. Another 2 to 3% are encumbered with temporary employees. So it can be filled, but the work is getting done. So, we're looking at continuing to whittle this down. One of the reasons it's so high is there were 250 FTEs, full-time equivalent positions, added to the budget in June of 2022. Since 2012, the average number that's added to the budget is usually around 80. So we've been, like I said before, in good times, the organization has been growing, and the 250 really has impacted this vacancy rate. My hope and what I understand is that this rate will be coming down significantly in the next staffing report. So I'll be interested to see how that evolves. The strategies for filling positions is building the HR staff. As I mentioned, there's good news there. We are building out our staff. We have many of the upper level positions filled, and now we're filling some of the technician and clerk type positions. So good news on that front. Process mapping and stakeholder analysis. The two new managers have been meeting regularly with, and I think we've met with all of the department heads at this point to do the stakeholder analysis, to find out what the pain points are, to elevate sort of awareness of how we do our recruitment and how we approach recruitments. We're working with an outside consultant to map our whole process. For real reform to occur does require agreement with our labor groups, and we have not honestly received a lot of relief on that front. So we are very carefully looking at the things that we do control and other processes internally that we can eliminate in order to make the process more efficient, but also more attractive to candidates, because it is a candidate market at this point, and we have to, we need to improve the customer's experience, right, for both the candidates and the departments. So increase communication and increase level of service. We also are looking at union and community partnerships. So if we, we do have some areas that the union has helped us out with in terms of building efficiencies. We're also getting more outwardly focused. As I said on top at the top of the presentation, HR traditionally has been very focused internally, and we are now looking more externally in terms of working closely with the Economic and Workforce Development Department and their different partnerships that they have in order to grow residents of Oakland into city jobs. So this is an area that I'm very excited about. We're going to be plotting out more job fairs that we'll be attending and potentially sponsoring ourselves So that's exciting. And leveraging new technology. And I would say over the last 5 years, we have really increased our technology package, whether it's around onboarding employees or performance management or training. All those areas have new technology and really up our efficiency. Most of our trainings are online at this point, and we've seen the participant rate just skyrocket. So it's been very exciting on that front. Challenges continue to be public sector talent is rare and hard to find. Hiring timelines. So when you have a really qualified candidate, how do you get them on board quickly? That's been a challenge. We still have a lot of compliance that we have to meet, promotions and attrition. Honestly, a lot of, I would say promotions is a great thing. We fill about 50% of our job vacancies with our own employees, but that does create another vacancy. But promotions is a really important part of sort of our equity goal in growing our own and moving people up into the organization, especially people, brown and black people into higher positions. Attrition is a real issue. There's just been burnout, I think throughout the workforce, whether it's in human resources or public works or safety. The Great Resignation is a real thing, and we have seen more people leave than we have in the past. So that's also a big challenge. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, please. A little more on the hiring process. I'd say about 85% of our full-time classifications are civil service positions. About 90% of our classifications are represented by unions. A sampling of hiring steps is you need to have an approved budget. There needs to be an exam plan put in place, job announcement that can take 2 to 4 weeks. You have to conduct a competitive process, which we call an exam. From there, you establish a eligible list. You need to certify the eligible list. Then it's in the department's control, and they conduct a hiring interview. Background and reference checks are really critical because the most important decision that any manager or supervisor will make is that hiring decision. Employees do serve a probationary period that is considered an extension of the examination process, but really it's the hiring decision that is very critical. So I always ask that people take their time with it and do it very intentionally and very carefully. A hiring timeline, what we have in here is 160 days due to HRM staffing, lack of technical talent, and then compliance requirements. Normally that's about 120 days, and that is from when a budget is approved to an eligible list is created. So that is not time to hire from a vacancy to when somebody's actually hired. That is a longer timeline. We do not have strong data on that because the way Oakland does hiring is through an eligible list process. An eligible list can last a certain amount of time. We're working on establishing data and analytics and metrics around the time to hire, so we can really start getting a baseline of the data. This is far easier to measure in the private sector than it is in the public sector, again, because eligible lists can be in place for a year and then somebody can get hired off of it. It really it's really difficult, challenging to get the metrics right on that. Another thing that I'd like you to keep in mind is that promotional public safety hiring is something that requires tremendous amounts of resources for the human resources staff. We are mandated from the labor agreements to be in this constant recruitment activity to fill promotional positions in the fire and police department, whether it's sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and in the fire department, battalion chief. So we're constantly, keeping these eligible lists fresh and keeping them moving. Okay, go to the next slide, please. This is my last one on labor relations. This is going to be important that comes in front of you. We have 7 labor contracts at the city of Oakland. These contracts and the labor relations in general are regulated by the state and MMBA, the Myers-Millis-Brown Act, that's been in place since the early 70s. And we have a local law, Employer Resolution Act, that's been in place since I think the 80s. And that's our local law. And that basically lines out or determines how unions can be established and how the certification process. It also gets into what happens once there is impasse with unions, and I'll talk about that a little bit further down here. So this is all driven by the subjects of bargaining. There are mandatory and permissive subjects of bargaining. The mandatory subjects are considered wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment. So you can imagine that can be pretty broad. So that goes into all the allowances that the city has, food allowance, bilingual pay, training allowance. The city has a very complex payroll system because of all of the different premium pays and allowances that are in these labor contracts. The good faith standards apply, meaning individuals need to be present at the table and need to be working towards agreement. And HR will mostly interface with council around the full contract bargaining. So this is the process is council authorized bargaining parameters in closed session. The negotiators work in real time with the union negotiators, and they sign off on tentative agreements. At the very end, you have a complete package, hopefully, of a tentative agreement, and the union will ratify that through a vote. And then the council will ratify that through a vote in open session. There are instances where the parties do not agree. And when that happens, it's called impasse. And for the public safety units, police and fire, they have binding arbitration. So the parties will present their case in front of an outside neutral arbitrator who has the authority to determine what the contract will be and what the agreement will be. It does take it out of local control and does give it to the arbitrator. And that's the process they have. That is in the city charter. And then impasse for the other groups, the SEIU, Local 21, and a couple other miscellaneous groups is called fact finding, which is the parties will present in front of a neutral fact finder their case, and the fact finder will eventually come up with a recommendation for an agreement. That recommendation is not binding, and then the city council can make a determination from there. With that, I think the next slide wraps it up. And I'm happy to take questions. President Bath and members of council, again, thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Director Appleyard and colleagues. One area of interest has been the staffing report, and I believe we heard the last report in December at the Finance and Management Committee.